Today I'd like to reflect on the idea of the brothers Karamazov, the great novel by Dostoevsky, and the idea of the little way. The little way, of course, is that famous approach of Therese of Lisieux that those little actions that we do every day can be so meaningful, so important, and so transformative. In the brothers Karamazov, the younger brother Elisha thinks that he is called to be a monk. And so he's reflecting on this call and he goes to the monastery. But monastery can sometimes be a place of escapism where you escape from your family. And a lot of times when that happens, religion really leads to things that aren't really healthy because you haven't really understood yourself that well. And so you're escaping from your life, you're escaping from challenges that you face. And so the elder in the monastery, Zosima, he says that, maybe it would be better off if you were to marry and become a monk in the world. And a very interesting concept, right? A monk in the world. The idea that you can bring a religious commitment, a religious feeling, a religious belief, bring that to the world. And a lot of times there's that tension, you have to make a living in the secular world. Can I make a living? Can I be married? Can I take care of a family? And can I still have that religious commitment? But Zosima sees something in Elisha where he thinks that that would be the best path for him to take. Uh, and Zosima comes up with the idea of what he calls an active love, that when you try to take your religious belief and try to live that religious belief in an active way, and you try to transform society, you do it by labor, hard work, and you also do it by fortitude, having the courage of your beliefs, having the courage to be persistent in your beliefs, having the courage not to give up when there are difficulties, when there are obstacles. And Elisha was surrounded by all sorts of obstacles in his family, crazy family dynamic going on with the father and the three brothers. Um, and the concept that Zosima was trying to give to Elisha was to become an image of Christ, to try to be so in tune with Christ, so in tune with your belief and your faith that you are totally one with Jesus. And of course, when you hear that word image in the Russian tradition, in the Orthodox tradition, you're thinking of the icon. The icon that comes to mind in terms of this uh, belief, this idea of the image of Christ, this idea of becoming one with Christ, is Christ the Pantocrator, that famous icon in the monastery of St. Catherine at Sinai, present-day Egypt, painted in the 500s, and has become just a very famous image of Christ. And the idea of this becoming one with Jesus is what Zosima was trying to explain and model, really, in his life for Elisha. And the idea is the redemptive Christ. When you look at that icon, you get an idea of the majesty of Christ. You get an idea of the just the amazing aspect of the life of Christ. Uh, and this concept of the redemptive Christ, very important because what it gives to us is the sense that Jesus can forgive everything. The things that we think are unforgivable. And there are so many things that come to mind that are, we confront these realities and we just say, this is unforgivable. I can't forgive it. There's no way it can be forgiven. Many times you see it with regard to child abuse, rape, murder, uh, in our own experience as a government trying to fight a war. We think of the My Lai massacre, the terrible massacre of so many innocent women and children in the village. And you think of these things and you say, gee, how can anyone forgive them? I mean, how can these terrible acts, these awful acts, be forgiven. But Jesus, our faith reminds us, can forgive everything. We certainly are responsible. And we're responsible in terms of our actions, in terms of our life, but we're responsible in terms of an active love. Each person we encounter, how can I love them in a special way? How can I love them as Jesus would love them? How can I forgive them when they hurt me? Jesus wants us to forgive. He calls us to forgiveness. He gives us the gift of forgiveness. So we reflect on this in terms of this idea of forgiveness, this idea of redemption, this idea of Jesus wanting to forgive. There certainly is evil in the world, but with the help of grace, humans can act justly to help those who are vulnerable, those who are marginalized, and to confront the powerful. We think of tremendous examples in terms of our own history, right? We think of Mother Teresa and how Mother Teresa tried to confront the powerful. Remember the famous example of her getting up at a prayer breakfast in Washington, D.C., and talking about the sacredness of all human life from the womb to the tomb in an era where, abortion and all of these activities that go against and militate against life were being practiced and embraced. And, Mother Teresa said no, trying to confront the powerful and say, well, wait a minute, what about those who are really in need? What about those who are the most vulnerable? How can we protect them? And at the end of her speech, everyone gave her a standing ovation. So she stood up, she confronted, but she stood for really what would Jesus want us to do in some of those situations. And of course, there are many difficult situations. It's not a simplistic thing, but it's bringing the love, the active love of Jesus and the forgiveness of Jesus to those situations. We think of Martin Luther King Jr. We think of how he tried to confront evil. And we think of Malcolm X. We think of George Floyd and that sense of the evil of somebody, killing another person, putting their knee on their neck and they died. And we think of that and we say, gee, how could that happen? That evil happened. And those evils, we can bring a sense of forgiveness to those evils. We can bring a sense of redemption to them. And really, this is the whole meaning of the incarnation. The incarnation, Jesus becoming one with us, and we trying to follow Jesus, trying to follow the example of Jesus. And so Jesus gives us an understanding of suffering. And we realize that suffering offered to God can transform us and can transform the world. A catastrophe can become part of a providential story. Many times things seem like it's a disaster, but it can lead ultimately to something that is good. We think of the freedom of the other person because people are free to change. The person who is sinful can change and can surprise us. We think of the controversy surrounding parole and, when does a person make that transformation? Sometimes hard to predict. But we have seen many examples of people who have done evil acts and they change in their lives. They realize the evil they've done and they embrace another way and another path. We think of the example of Joseph's brothers. We think of the evil that they did to Joseph in the Bible, and that tremendous story from the book of Genesis, and they wanted to kill him and do all sorts of things to him. But Joseph offered the gift of forgiveness, and that was transformative. And those brothers changed their attitude, and they embraced a different path. We think of Moses, and we think of Moses who performed that terrible murder, and yet God used him to lead the people. And again, he transformed into a person who could listen to God's call and, of course, reluctantly embrace God's call and live a different life. Then we think of Zacchaeus. We think of Zacchaeus, the tax collector, and his encounter with Jesus and how he was transformed and he decided, I'm going to give twice what I took to those that I exploited. I'm going to make it up. I'm going to transform. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to change and become a better person, a more loving person, a more caring person. I am going to follow Jesus. And this all leads to, as we see in the brothers Karamazov, the need for concrete deeds. Elisha reaching out to the children and trying to help them in that story. Zosima impressed on him the idea that if you're going to love, you have to love concretely. It doesn't have to be in great things, it doesn't have to be in amazing things, but it has to be done always with that sense of love and that sense of forgiveness that Jesus has modeled for us.